Separate batteries and removable battery box covers are provided in a number of truck kits on the market, including the Transtar conventionals, as noted on the box side. This is the most recent AMT Round 2 version. Note item 9, a blue tractor with white stripe, hood tipped forward, and spoke wheels. And compare with the side panel item 7 of an original issue Transtar 4270 kit showing the same blue truck, white stripe, hood tipped forward, and spoke wheels. Aside from some minor color variation, which may be due to this old kit box from the early 70s being faded, the rest of the artwork is identical, and reusing the box art makes sense, considering that the 4300 was retooled from the 4270 kit in the first place. What's interesting is that the hood pictured on the 4270 kit is actually the longer 4300 hood. Here are the two hoods pictured side by side for comparison. The side panel image ends up being incorrect for either kit, with the hood length being wrong for the 4270 and the spoke wheels not representing what's provided in the 4300 kit. Just one of those little pieces of trivia that keeps the hobby interesting. Back to the battery box detailing project. Here's a Transtar 4300 battery box with the cover removed, showing tie downs and battery cables. These are details which can be easily added to the model version. The kit batteries have detail molded on, but it's in fairly shallow relief. These will be replaced with freestanding parts. Removal of the molded on detail is optional, but it's easily done with a chisel blade and a hobby knife. Here are the batteries with molded on detail removed, and painted black with the caps highlighted in yellow. I find that a blunt toothpick or wooden dowel is a much easier tool to use than a paintbrush for touching up the caps, as it allows for more precise paint placement. The kit battery box as supplied does not have a back wall, so a strip was cut 5/16 inch wide from a piece of 30 thou styrene sheet and glued in place. 30 thou is a little over thick for sheet metal, but it matches better proportionally with the rest of the kit parts. 10 thou styrene sheet was cut to match the inside dimensions of the battery box floor. This will become a false floor to which the batteries are glued, so details can be added to those parts as a subassembly. The extra 10 thou thickness on the floor of the battery box does affect the fit of the cover, so a small amount was filed off as required, test fitting multiple times to ensure a proper fit. Batteries are now glued to the 10 thou styrene false floor, and the fit is checked one more time. And now the battery box itself can be glued to the frame. Tabs and slots are provided for alignment, but out of necessity for kit tooling purposes, these are slightly oversized, resulting in a visible gap when the battery box is installed. This gap is filled with styrene strip and filed smooth. However, the battery box still has no visible means of attachment to the frame. 20 thou by 60 thou styrene strip is drilled for 20 thou styrene rod, which is glued in place to simulate bolt heads, after which the excess material on the back side is cut off and sanded smooth, and the finished piece is cut to the required length, beveled and trimmed as required, and glued in place, making the battery box look like it's bolted on rather than just glued to the frame. Battery hold-down hardware on this truck consists of a formed steel bar running along the top outside corner of the batteries, and 3 steel rods attaching it to the battery box floor. These rods aren't vertical, instead they're angled inward slightly, so they provide clamping force against the back wall of the battery box. For the model, 60 thou styrene angle is used, with the sharp 90-degree corner filed flat. 3 holes were drilled, 20 thou diameter, to match the spacing of the batteries. This piece was then pre-painted using Tamiya dark iron, cut to length, and glued in place on the corner of the batteries. Having this piece in place made it easier to locate the holes for the battery cables. These holes were drilled 20 thou diameter to fit the shanks of the bolt head castings which will be used for battery terminals. The battery cables themselves are 032 diameter solder, which is easy to flatten, and drill one end as shown here. This hole is also 20 thousandths of an inch to accommodate the shank of the bolt head casting. A single edge razor blade is used to trim away excess material to make the end of the cable look more like a flat lug, and the corners are rounded off slightly. A bolt head casting is glued in place, secured with one small drop of CA glue, providing a pin which will be inserted into the drilled hole in the battery. Individual cables are made and installed, leaving the last two terminals open for the cables that will go to the frame and the starter motor. At this stage, the cables in the bolt head castings will remain unpainted, as the next step is to install the styrene rods, which simulate the hold-down bolts. These are 20 thou diameter and are also pre-painted Tamiya dark iron to match the hold-down clamp. They're cut extra long, glued in place, and then they're filed down flush with the battery hold-down bar, and then a bolt head casting is glued in place to simulate the fastener. From left to right, the styrene rod is in place extra long, the middle one has been filed down flush with the styrene hold-down bar, and on the far right, the bolt head casting is glued in place. On the bottom of the subassembly, the styrene rods are also left extra long, glued in place, and the next step will be to cut them off and sand everything smooth. Hold-down clamp and rods are touched up with Tamiya dark iron, battery terminals are chrome silver, and the cables themselves are touched up with flat black. Starter motor and ground cables are attached now and left extra long, so the subassembly can be installed after painting, and the solder can be routed around the frame as required and formed into place. Set in place here for demonstration purposes. Doing this work as a subassembly on the bench is a lot easier than trying to build a ship in a bottle and install battery cables on board the finished model. Removable battery box covers are a great way to highlight this detail. Here's a Kenworth example on a W900. Interestingly, the AMT Kenworth kits provide batteries, but the Revell of Germany ones do not. Another Kenworth example, this time a cab-over version, in the form of AMT's K100. And we'll finish with a look at a truck from which the batteries have been removed, leaving only the cables behind. These were again modeled using 032 diameter wire solder, ends flattened, and a hole drilled for the terminal. Kit parts provide a great starting point, and with a few simple added details, you can bring the battery compartment of your model truck to life.